The Africa to Moon project really hopes to inspire young children that they don't need the billions of dollars of funding to do it, that the dream is enough. The passion, of course, the expertise, of course, the hard work, of course, the time, the collaboration, the networks, all of that's necessary. But to put the dream first, just keep believing, keep going.
Welcome back to the Humble Mind podcast. Good to see you. What can space teach us about living more wisely here on Earth? Well, today we've got an out of this world episode with someone that I've followed and admired for a long time. She's also from South Africa like me, but she's got her sights set on the stars. So Dr. Adriana Marais joins us today. She's a theoretical physicist, an astronaut candidate for Mars, one of the Mars missions, and she's also the visionary mind behind Africa's first mission to the moon. Her work spans quantum biology, lunar exploration, and even designing off-grid habitats for some of Earth's harshest environments, all in service of a more imaginative and resilient human future. I'm so excited about today. She joins us to explore how space, science, and community can expand both our sense of possibility and our responsibility here on Earth. So welcome, Adriana, from Shenzhen in China. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'll have to humble some of those claims you've made about me in a moment. But let me say first, what can space teach us? And I think the sense of perspective both gives us, I think, a sense of pride in how far we've come as humans in terms of space exploration. But with reference to the name of your podcast, I think a definite dash of humility in terms of how far we still have to go as a society, as a species, and as explorers.
Yeah, absolutely. As explorers. Well, I mean, you've kind of framed up my first thing that my first sort of question I wanted to throw at you, which is, well, firstly, full disclosure, I am a huge space nerd. My knowledge of the 60s space race is pretty good. I can explain the Apollo program from start to finish for everyone who might dare to listen. I'm a Trekkie. I'm a lifelong Star Wars fan. I'm just always been captivated by the great beyond. And I'd love to hear your perspective, but also perhaps more in general, why do you think space captivates the human imagination and our sense of wonder so deeply? What is it about the great beyond that just has us kind of so curious and so entranced?
So I think we are fundamentally curious explorers as humans. That's defined us since the first days that we walked on this earth, like 200,000 years ago. You know, it may have been the land horizon and later the ocean horizon that drew us. But nowadays we can zoom in on almost any part of Earth, whether it's through Earth observation data or live on various channels that we might look at different parts of the Earth with. And so the next frontier is really beyond that, a frontier that has occupied our curiosity for some time, but now we're getting closer to having, real tangible insights to worlds beyond Earth, maybe not personally, but through the experiences of others. So, we will have humans living on the moon, if all goes to plan, within the next few years, before 2030. So I don't need to comment too much on the US right now and what impact the situation there might have on the space program. But China has said they will have people on the moon before 2030, and they typically don't go announcing dates unless they're quite serious about achieving those. So, the Apollo era was one thing and was a huge inspiration to many young people and a trigger for many technologies, and the commercialization of the computer, the phone, mobile phone, etc., like all kind of, in some sense, came out of that era. But that was, almost a once-off, right? Because we haven't been back to the moon since 1972. And in fact, the US's next, since 1972, attempt to land on the moon last year was partially successful with the private intuitive machines lander. So needless to say, I'm sitting here in China due to our partnerships with Springing East. I think we should be going to space with collaboration. This is a hugely resource intensive activity, and what would be better for all of us would be to do it in collaboration. And that's at the heart of many of the projects I'm involved in. But I think literally what space gives us is perspective. Like literally, I mean, being able to look back at our planet from Earth orbit has given us huge insights into our climate. I don't need to go into the range of things that satellite data enables, the internet, financial communications networks, et cetera, et cetera. But then really that perspective of just how fragile, how precious, how I wouldn't say insignificant, but how small our world is compared to the vastness of what's out there. And I think that sense of adventure, that sense of curiosity, that sense of exploration has been what has allowed us to survive so many massive catastrophic events until now. The politics of today is nothing compared to asteroid impacts, super volcano eruptions, ice ages that humans have endured and survived. And here we are. And that drive to explore, I believe, is what's got us this far and will continue to take us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just hearing you say the word perspective reminds me of that famous image. I think it was popularized by Carl Sagan, the pale blue dot. And he wrote this beautiful piece as well, all the kings, all the wars, all the bloodshed, all the, struggles and ambition and everything, all of that suspended in this tiny little pixel. I think he said a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Beautiful poetry. And it just puts everything into perspective, right? Everything that we're so concerned about ourselves, you just zoom out, not even, near the nearest star, just, a couple, 100 million kilometers, and it just seems all, pathetically small, but I suppose humbling as well. Was there a moment for you, perhaps in your childhood or in school or something, where it seemed absolutely certain, like, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to spend my life pursuing?
I had a strange kind of, I'm not sure how to describe it. I've written a book which was published this year, so you can find out the longest story there. But yeah, when I was around 4 or 5 at playgroup, kindergarten, whatever you would call it, I had this idea that if there was a need for people to search for a world beyond Earth, it was kind of an urgent call for people to search for a world beyond Earth. Would I volunteer? And I don't know on what basis this imagining happened, but I agreed at that point to volunteer, that I would wholeheartedly volunteer. I agreed. And then I was shocked later in 2012 to hear the call for volunteers for a one-way trip to Mars with the Mars One project. And, in a heartbeat, less than a heartbeat, I thought, oh, well, this is it. Obviously, I'm going to do everything I can to be on this mission. This is what I agreed to do. The Mars One project is bankrupt, let me say. So
It
no
is?
longer a candidate. Yes, the Mars One project declared bankruptcy in 2019. That's when I founded Proudly Human, because I think there's a lot to be done before looking at the billions of dollars required to launch to Mars. There's plenty of work to be done in terms of what Proudly Human focuses on is communities of people in truly extreme places. And there's no lack of those, by the way, like real people working in extreme conditions in teams that wouldn't otherwise be able to survive except through expertise, collaboration, empathy, all of the things that enable a team to do work in places like Antarctica or deep inside mines. I mean, there are plenty of examples. So I think there's a lot of data to be collected on the dynamics within teams. You can let's assume the technology works seamlessly. The technology is one aspect, but in my mind, we have most of the pieces of the technology to survive on the lunar surface, hopefully, because we'll be going there soon. And if we can survive on the lunar surface, Mars is a much easier place to set up camp, much further in that sense, not easier, but the temperature fluctuations, etc., are much more moderate because of the atmosphere. So, I believe all the pieces of the technology are there. Integration and, not having systems failure is another aspect. But let's assume all of that is in place. The most critical part to success is the team spirit, the dynamics within the team. A fundamental breakdown within the community of people living and working there could mean a failure of the project in spite of the technology all functioning perfectly. So even though I come from a physics background, I thought this was really the part we should focus on. And I think this has implications not only for people living on the moon or Mars, but for humanity in general, even on a planetary scale. what kinds of characteristics or activities can mitigate conflict, and what kinds of activities and philosophies, cultures, etc., can lead to better cohesion, better collaboration, and better team spirit within groups of people.
It's a very interesting question, and a humanistic one, I suppose, as well. No matter how far away we might get away from Earth, whether it might be in our own backyard, to the moon, or even further to Mars, and maybe even further than that. But we still have to kind of think of safeguards and systems for us not to descend into petty squabbling. So I suppose that's always there. I apologize. I didn't mention the fact that you're the founder of Proudly Human in my introduction, and also that you've just published a new book, Out of This World into the Next, as well, which is now available everywhere, which is awesome. So maybe let's start at the moon, at the sort of the moon level, closest thing to Earth, and I'd love to learn a bit more about what Africa to Moon is all about, if people have not heard about it. And I suppose also you mentioned, and I know this, which is always a stat that's kind of staggered me a little bit, but we haven't been back to the moon in 53 years, even though now we've got more processing power in, a crappy smartphone compared with what, the Apollo command module had. So clearly we've got all this capability, but we still haven't been back. What is it about the moon that captures your interest, but also that is seems to still be this challenge of kind of going back and making a success of it until now, until you pop in?
Well, I think it's a super exciting time for space exploration. A lot of people after Apollo were, all systems ready for the next step. And, sadly for many of the engineers and scientists, they may have already retired without having seen a return to the moon, which is, it could have been disheartening, except that I think luckily for us, we're alive at a time where we're going to see a resurgence in activities on our moon. It is our moon, so I do kind of consider the Earth-Moon one system. And so it's a natural sandbox for exploring the rest of the solar system, but also a natural place to establish ourselves. So before speaking very generally, let me talk about Africa to Moon. So my very dear friend and collaborator, soon to be Dr. Carla Sharp, came up with the concept. She's the mission director of Africa to Moon. She came up with a concept for a low-cost, low-frequency telescope on the moon more than 10 years ago. And when we look back at these big projects that we've had, it seems like it often takes around a decade to get these things off the ground, literally. So I met Carla eavesdropping on a conversation at an event in Cape Town, where astronaut Katie Coleman and Chief NASA researcher at the time, Ellen Stofan, were attending. And so we were both there. I eavesdropped on her conversation, hearing she worked at the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope. I wanted to use the data for my research into looking for the building blocks of life in space. And we met. This was just over 10 years ago. She told me about Africa to Moon, and we've been working together ever since. So the game changer here was that China put out a call for payloads. So since Chang'e 6, China has been opening up space on their moon missions for any country, except for those that have their own sanctions against China. Any country that can put together a proposal. So we've seen all sorts of achievements. Pakistan had great achievements in Chang'e 6 already. Chang'e 7 will launch next year, and Chang'e 8, which will launch towards the end of the decade, 28 or 29. Our payload has been selected to fly to the lunar South Pole. So the country to have arrived closest to the lunar South Pole so far is India, another country doing massive things in terms of lunar exploration. But in fact, we've never yet landed at the location where the permanently inhabited human bases are planned for. So funnily enough, the US and China and all of their partners, our Foundation for Space Development Africa, which Carla founded and which leads the Africa to Moon project, is also a partner on the China International Lunar Research Station. So the telescope being delivered to the South Pole is really a interesting gateway for us to participate in the establishment of the base there. So why the lunar South Pole, you may ask, and why are both the US and China and partners all going to the same place? Also one of the most extreme places in the solar system. Temperatures plummet down to below negative 200 degrees Celsius, and then can go up to, depending whether you're in the shade or the sun, like at the equator, lunar temperatures can go over 120. So from an engineering perspective, it's a bit of a nightmare. Of course, the moon having no atmosphere to speak of. These temperature fluctuations are extreme. You're dealing with hard vacuum. So these are the challenges. But the reason why the bases are planned there is because there's permanently shadowed areas with lunar ice, water ice. So this water ice would be a resource, of course, for not only the water that crewed research bases would need, but also breathable air and obviously fuel in terms of the hydrogen that's in that water. So rather than excavating subsurface, which sadly we don't yet know much about, subsurface lunar excavation, we can theorize, but the surface ice is available in the permanently shadowed crater regions at the South Pole. That's the most dense part of the moon with the lunar ice. So that's the location where this is all going to kick off. And so, yes, in April this year, our radio telescope was selected for launch with Chang'e 8. And not only will it attempt to do new science not possible from Earth, but there's also an positioning system which is required to do the kind of radio astronomy we want to do. We have a number of antennae. We started off with 4, but negotiating with the Chinese is tough, so we've ended up with 3. 3 of these antennae that are shaped like balls, concentric loop antennas that should be omnidirectional. They can look in any direction. If they roll, they will eventually just reach their position, and they work together, forming an array, and then effectively creating an instrument that's as large as the separation between the furthest 2. So this is how you can do radio astronomy even with a 30 centimeter diameter sphere, which is what we have. So these 3 work as an array, and the positioning system that they're required to do radio astronomy is something we think could be or will be useful going forward for humans on the surface of the moon, right? Because there's no GPS on the moon yet. So all of this infrastructure needs to be built, whether we're thinking about water for the crews, whether we're thinking about positioning systems, we're doing this all from scratch. So this is really exciting. And then I think the generosity and the spirit of collaboration with which China approaches space exploration is really a great example for, I think, all of humanity going forward. We are waiting for, what's the catch? But that we will have access to the data along with China for the first year, after which time they mandate that our data is shared globally. So I think this is truly done in the spirit of collaboration. Of enabling countries around the world who don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars or more to launch their own missions to the moon, but do have the capability to build different instruments. This is really a great stepping stone, I think, for better participation in space exploration around the world.
Wow. So many things I want to respond to there, but maybe just going back to the moon part for a moment. So everything you're doing and all of these missions you mentioned now are obviously unmanned. Right,
sadly,
they're not manned missions. They're creating that basic infrastructure for us to be able to return and hopefully return for longer, ultimately, right?
The mass limitation on our project is 15 kilograms, so as much as I might, 1.5, so as much as I might want to squeeze into that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So just in terms of you mentioned the South Pole and, those crazy, extreme, hostile environments. Talk to me a bit about kind of what it's like to design a piece of equipment, and I suppose ultimately as well, think about what a human colony, settlement, maybe even just a landing base will look like, and what are the kind of thought processes needed to sort of be factored in when we're, designing a piece of equipment or ultimately somewhere where humans can live in such a crazy, extreme, alien-like environment like that. Like how do we even do that?
Yeah, firstly, I think it's a great place to practice for the rest of the solar system because it is really one of the most extreme places, and it's a 3-day trip. During the Apollo era, it was 3 days. We could probably reduce that trip there, and so in the proximity to all of the resupplies and the potential medical evacuation emergencies in such close proximity to Earth, this is a truly great place, which we could have made better use of until now, but here we are. So a great place to, prepare for the rest of the solar system. So the environment, what I haven't mentioned yet, is the radiation. So typically the instruments that are designed for the moon now, we are hoping ours will survive the lunar night, which is 14 days. That's when the temperatures plummet potentially to below negative 200 degrees Celsius.
For 2 weeks straight.
14 days of
Wow.
14 Earth days, the temperatures plummet, eventually reaching around negative 200 or maybe less, depending on whether you're in the shadow. So most instruments don't survive the lunar night. And so the radiation, which I haven't mentioned yet, a single event can take out your electronics and render your whole instrument useless in the beginning. But when we're thinking about humans, we'd be more thinking about the long-term exposure to radiation, which our instruments probably won't have. We're hoping to survive the day, perhaps the night, and perhaps some of the next day, in terms of the electronics coming back online after that extreme cold. But when it comes to crews, I think what we would be looking at would be a rather rapid rotation of people. So we say permanently inhabited, but it's going to be permanently inhabited by different crews, because there would be a period of maximum months where people would live on the surface.
Like the ISS, right?
It's so I think the ISS is still partially the exact comparison of radiation levels. I guess we need to look in detail to that, which these missions at the lunar South Pole will do. But conditions on the moon can be even harsher than the International Space Station, which is closer within the magnetosphere of the Earth. So rapid rotation of crews we'd be looking at, and my personal favorite, I'm not sure if that's on the cards yet, because we'd be probably looking at living in the land or close to the land initially, and of course all of the plans that the US and China and Russia have for building bases. But lava tubes or the tunnels created by previous activity, potentially underground caverns. So on Mars, this is a favorite candidate place of mine to potentially set up camp, which can give you protection from radiation. And several potential sites of these have been identified remotely from orbit. So living underground could be a good way to be shielded from radiation, or a lot of work is obviously going on in materials development. So new materials that could be lightweight or potentially manufactured on the lunar surface, which could give protection to whether it's particles or radiation from the sun and the rest of the solar system and beyond. This is a huge challenge, along with the vacuum, temperature fluctuations, radiation. Those are the critical ones.
So, thinking about all these crazy environments, isn't it easier just to completely rule out the need for human bodies to actually physically go there, and certainly for Mars as well, which is much further? But why do we need to send humans physically there? Can't we just, certainly, compared with the 50 years that we were there last time, we've got way more advanced technology. We can do things remotely. Surely we can send a piece of kit there that can do everything we need to do without needing to spend so much more additional research and training and money and everything else to just make it safe for human beings in our fragile little bodies, where we probably can't cope for too long, and all this crazy radiation. Why do you think we place such a premium on physically needing to be there?
Great question. For me, it's obvious, because we want to go and explore.
I know what you'd say.
But good question. I just forgot to say something in my previous comment where I wanted to say I'm leading the science for Africa to Moon. So I'm working with the team as we engage in the various discussions, but basically saying a few prayers, because the engineering team has a huge challenge to make this thing work. From the science perspective, that's the easy part, right? The thing gets to the moon, turns on, works, sends back data. And then we look at it and see new things about the low frequency domain of the solar system that we hadn't seen before, right? Because the ionosphere of Earth actually blocks radiation below around 20 or 10 megahertz. It becomes increasingly almost impossible to observe these low frequencies from Earth. So we're excited to get the data, and the challenge is really with the engineers now who are working miracles to make sure that this thing survives those 30 days maybe while we collect data.
Yeah.
And so, why do we then add the additional complication of wanting humans to survive in these conditions? But I think that goes back to is it a scientific endeavor that we're doing? Are we going to do research about, I guess I'm from a science background, so I should agree that we are going there to do science, but I feel like the reason we're doing science is so that we can go there. So the other way around, if we can understand the lunar environment, then we're in a better position to set up camp there. And I don't know why I feel this innate, need to explore, but I believe most humans feel the same way. Luckily, not all in the same maybe level of being prepared to put themselves at risk, because otherwise we might have gone extinct a very long time ago.
Right.
But there are some of us. There are some of us who push boundaries further than others and enable then, new ways of thinking, to put it broadly. Our ability to survive in all the different environments on Earth has indeed enabled us to survive huge climate shifts in the past. And our ability to survive in environments beyond Earth could eventually save us from some potential catastrophic event that happens on Earth, like another asteroid impact, which our ancestors have survived before, which would have a far more detrimental effect now with our densely populated areas and our complete reliance in some cases on technology. Yes. So the more we explore now, the better equipped we are for unpredictability in the future. That's the simple way of looking at it. Whether we're talking about fundamental research, curiosity-driven fundamental research, which looks into things that we can't even imagine the application for now. Some person is working in their basement for years developing some theory on something which seemed to have no use, and then suddenly it turns out this is critical for something. So there's that aspect, but then there's also, if we can survive at the lunar South Pole, we can, much more easily set up camp on the surface of Mars. And while these might not be permanently inhabited by the same people, having that capability, I think, will not only give us the capability to live beyond Earth in general, but more importantly, to be more efficient and more aware of the way we live on Earth in terms of resource consumption.
Yes.
So I think if we see people living on the surface of Mars, then, is there really an excuse for poverty? Can we justify the poverty in which people on Earth live if we're able to set up robust, efficient technology on the surface of Mars, perhaps that we 3D print from sand? It seems crazy and that we have to go to Mars to learn how to 3D print houses from sand. We've got plenty of people living in poverty in the desert, but somehow that doesn't seem to be trigger enough to really commercialize the stuff on a large scale. So maybe space exploration in parallel with reaching new frontiers will also help us to solve challenges on Earth that we could have solved some time ago, but maybe this will be a trigger.
Yeah, like you said, the value of perspective. Sometimes you've got to be able to zoom out and see the pale blue dot for what it is in order to get a real handle on what's required to hopefully fix or to ameliorate our challenges. Yeah. So talk to me for a moment now about Mars. So Mars is further away. I think, I remember learning a little bit about, every 22 months or so, it gets a little closer to Earth and it's possible to make the trip in 4 months or 5 months or so. So is that right?
If you've watched The Martian, that's that critical launch period.
Yes.
Almost
yes,
just less
Matt
than
Damon.
2 years. The
Yeah.
home and transfer orbit. Yeah, that's correct. But I think our quickest mission there now is around 7 months. But with the Starship or other novel propulsion systems, we may be able to reduce that to a few months. And then I think, interestingly, that's quite similar to the journeys our ancestors made. I guess yours or certainly mine came from Europe on a boat in the 1600s, actually.
Right,
and that trip was pretty treacherous. It was definitely one way. These were like religious refugees not planning to go back, not affording a return ticket, coming to the tip of Africa. And so I just see massive parallels rather than being a trip into the unknown. I see huge parallels with even more treacherous journeys here on Earth. When you arrive to Mars, it's not like you're going to wonder what you're going to find there. You're going to know in infinite detail what you're going to find there. You've got decades of data. You've got 3D printers. You've got all your life support systems. You've got like a team of probably thousands, if not more, people on Earth on standby to help you with any issues.
Yeah.
It's further away, so there's that like around 10 minutes on average signal delay. So even at the speed of light, Mars is around 10 minutes away. So You will need some local capabilities to deal with emergencies, because waiting, up to 40 minutes when Earth and Mars are at their maximum separation for a reply could be too long for some kinds of emergencies. So you definitely want a crew of people who can deal with emergencies locally. And then you start to this line of thinking leads you to the real attraction for me for Mars, which is that it's far enough away to not be part of Earth. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, local culture will emerge, local regulations will emerge, local governance systems will emerge, local economics, whatever that looks like, will emerge. Whereas on the moon, I don't see that happening. The moon's part of Earth. So we'll still see nationalism, we'll still see capitalism, we'll see whatever we see on Earth, probably also on the moon. Maybe it will be a beacon for scientific collaboration in the way that Antarctica and the space station have been. We can be positive about that. But it certainly won't be a breakaway, from Earth in the way that a breakaway, wrong word, a way of reimagining many of the systems that we have on Earth. I think Mars provides the opportunity for that. And that's what I'm particularly excited about. I have no idea if I'll be around long enough to witness that or participate in that, because the timeframes are very difficult to predict. But for me, this would be the ultimate milestone for humanity. Would be a chance to reimagine society on another planet, not in isolation from Earth, with Earth, in conjunction with the history of humanity on Earth, to think about how we could structure a society from scratch if we had the chance.
I love the idea. It reminds me of Star Trek in a way, where you've got these kind of colonies of humans, and they're humans just like us, but they're on different planets, and different cultures and different sort of norms emerge, which is kind of cool. So for a moment, you just gave me the thoughts of, maybe the Martians that we discover one day are us, but we're just living on a different planet with different norms. And, I suppose with enough time and enough genetic drift, will end up being a little bit different, but still close enough to, Earthbound humans, which is interesting. So let's say we land on Mars, and because I think a lot of people have sort of similar basic ideas about Mars and the surface and kind of the conditions. It's red, and kind of, you've got these sort of like, muggy looking clouds and sort of this dry terrain. But I think that's kind of where it stops. What if you were sort of a Martian tour guide? What could we expect? We land on there, radiation, wind, atmosphere. What's the general kind of like quick makeup of what it's like to actually be standing on Mars?
Yeah, so I wrote a whole chapter in my book on this exactly. So let me try and somewhat poetically, compared to the rest of the book, imagining exactly awaiting guests who are coming to Mars to be shown around after we've been living there for a year. So what's kind of critical, I feel like, I mean, you can lay out solar panels and have batteries and all that, but at the base of any successful community is power systems, right? To power literally everything else that happens. And so I'm really excited about these modular nuclear reactors that are under development at the moment. China's been announcing milestones this week in developing these small modular reactors. And although they're still like hundreds, if not more, tons per unit at the moment, so small is maybe a word. Hopefully we can get smaller, let's say, in terms of being able to transport these modular reactors to Mars. But of course, nuclear power in the form of RTGs, radioisotope thermoelectric generators for the rovers like Curiosity and Perseverance, have been critical for our space exploration. And so when we're thinking about power, I think nuclear will be part of that. Solar, of course, we can do. Also, the kind of space-grade photovoltaics we've been developing for Earth orbit put us in a good position to be reliable in terms of solar power generation on the surface of Mars. Where would we live? I mean, the easiest place to live would be in the lander initially. You would want to work on laying out your solar arrays or getting your power systems operational potentially beforehand. So there come in the remote rovers perhaps that could start to put up the power systems, perhaps even start to collect a whole lot of sand to collect water. So Curiosity is found in the various places it's looked. Around 2% of the sand by mass is water ice. So if you scoop enough of that, heat it, you can extract the evaporated water, store it in tanks.
And water, as in water, drinkable. I mean, obviously you need to treat it, but is that ultimately something you could have for human consumption?
Yeah, sure. And I think even more important than the human consumption is the hydrogen for fuel and oxygen for breathable air. I mean,
Sure.
you can also access oxygen from carbon dioxide, which is present in the atmosphere on Mars. So this is a huge difference between the Moon and Mars, is that on Mars you've got the resource of the atmosphere. So with a simple system of like a pump, you can just extract, take this carbon dioxide to some kind of instrumentation where you extract either carbon or oxygen or do what you need to do with that chemically. Yeah, with electrolysis, you can extract oxygen from the water that you would get from the surface sand. If you evaporate it off, you're going to get H2O out. Okay, I'm speaking very broadly. I'm a theorist, so yeah, the engineers will deal with the nitty
No, that's
gritty
great.
with the nitty gritty of that. But yeah. Then my favorite candidate place to live is underground. So then you don't need to do a lot of the construction or excavation. I mean, you probably want to have inflatable pop-up modules or some kind of modules that are lightweight that you can bring prefab pieces and then put them together on the surface, besides living in the rather cramped lander, which you would have already been confined to for the 6 month or maybe less journey. So landing near one of the known openings to these underground lava tube entrances, which some of them can be visible on the surface, means if we can explore under there. Okay, now this is my idea. I haven't really bounced this off the engineers that would probably tell me all the nightmares that would be involved. But
Oh, you hit it
I
here
think
first.
making
Yep.
I think in making some kind of like epoxy resin to spray the surfaces of this cave with, and then just creating airlocks. So if you
Oh,
go
cool.
to the Kango caves or some other cave system that people might be familiar with, you often get these like narrow entrances with these then voluminous kind of caves in between. And so if you could identify one with this fixed number of entrances and put airlocks on those, and then you need to make sure the rock's not porous because you're going to be pumping that full of your atmosphere to breathe. Then you could gradually expand your habitat through these various caverns. That's my favorite idea, because you might also find really interesting things down there in terms of metals and minerals, or perhaps even life. Some weird lichen or some other extremophile that's eked out an existence below the surface, which poses big problems for living there. But let's skip that part for now. So yeah, this is the dream. Maybe it sounds more like a science fiction movie. But yeah, the power systems are critical. So we need to have a clear idea, of how we're going to expand the power systems. And I'm not sure solar is feasible to scale to having a city of 1 million people like Elon Musk has spoken about. But you've got the UAE preparing for a city on Mars by 2117. You've got SpaceX, you've got China, all thinking about this. China's put 2033 out there as the date where it plans to land astronauts on the surface of Mars.
Wow. Really? 8 years.
So,
Okay. Wow.
So I think all the technologies exist. Whether these are scalable to a city of 1 million is completely unknown, and probably not. We don't have all the details to think about scaling that yet. But can we survive on the surface of Mars? I think certainly. We've already demonstrated the ability to live in the space station for 20 years. So different environments, but in some ways more extreme, and a complete lack of resources.
What do you think? I'm interested in, perhaps you are too, but as you know, Humble Mind is ultimately a community of people who stick together and learn together and do things together. And ultimately, I'd imagine that any kind of long-term project success on Mars, the Moon, perhaps even, further than that, is always going to rely on certain sort of social elements and perhaps even political elements to also make sense, certain norms and kind of rules, whatever you like, dynamics that make sense for the people who are there, so that, you've got a basic kind of law and order, you've got rules, you don't have people committing crimes, because we're humans, we're still mammals, we're still likely to do dumb things along the way. So talk to me a bit about how you see the kind of social dynamics and let's say the community building of, let's say, the first few parties that go to Mars, and ultimately that maybe turn it into a colony over the next, 40, 50 years. What are some of the ingredients that we'll need to have or to consider at that kind of community level to make something like that work and for it to ultimately not backfire?
So I think making it work, I would even rephrase that and say that I think there would be a natural drive towards a certain kind of culture without needing a control system initially, because things are just so extreme and you're so far from Earth collaboration and respect for life would naturally become the dominant kind of ethics of the community. I don't see how that would not be the case. On the moon it might be different. There's still nationalist-driven competition, etc. Knowing that Earth is only a couple of days away, knowing that you're flying your country's flag. On Mars it's not so clear. You've got a resupply mission potentially taking over a year. You've got communications delays of like up to an hour. So you really need to solve challenges locally. And I think then most people would agree that collaboration is going to be the way to solve these, and respect for life then, which is respect for each of your team members and the essential skills they bring to the project, whether they're the engineer or the emergency surgeon or whatever it may be, or the agriculturalist, growing the food that will enable your survival beyond resupply missions. And then all the way down to the seeds. There's a lot of things you can 3D print if you bring the right equipment on Mars going forward. A lot of development still needs to happen there, but seeds is one thing you cannot create from scratch. We have not understood life, and I think that would be extremely obvious when you arrive on Mars, is just how precious every living system you have with you is. Whether it's the precious then bacteria in your gut that are not just available in every breathful of air you take, but you probably have to bring a whole microbial bank of different microbes with you to perform different functions, whether it's microbial fuel cells or, you can produce many kinds of different chemicals with the help of specifically bred or engineered microbes. So almost as a chemical synthesis process as well for your greenhouse, your garden to survive, you're going to need microbes. So like every one of these living creatures, whether they're microbial all the way through to humans, would be a valuable, essential member of your community. Imagine the first plants sprouting, how invested everyone would be into keeping them alive, and probably a lot of time would be spent in the greenhouse, just chilling or tending to the various things growing there that would be essential to your continued existence. And so maybe that paints a picture of how I do believe respect for life will be a much more natural way of engaging in a much more naturally emerging culture than it's become here on Earth, only because I think we take for granted how reliant we are on all the living systems around us. Photosynthetic organisms providing oxygen, regulating temperature, regulating air, whether they're in the ocean, regulating that part of it, or the atmosphere, or all of the unseen organisms as well as the obvious ones, each other, which just because there are a lot of us, we've started to take for granted. And then the perspective that space brings is so important. I don't think we need to physically travel to space to start to understand just how precious our ecosystem is here on Earth. And I think when we look at either videos of Mars of people living there, or we are one of the people living there, I think it's going to be extremely obvious that life is a precious resource and we should do all we can to protect it. It's about life is collaborative. We've been sold this thing about competition, but I don't buy it. Life is collaborative. And when we understand that and when we embody that, we will have a far greater chance of reaching our dreams, whether that's exploring beyond Earth or creating a more positive future on Earth, when we embrace that collaborative nature of life.
It's refreshing to hear you say that, because it totally makes sense on a basic level, but it seems that there's some sense in having something where there's a competitive system that allows us to kind of harness the best of innovation, so that we can get to a certain level where there's technology that emerges that we need. There's certain social systems. There's maybe a system of excellence to make sure that the best people go and the best people are at the top to help out and to contribute their talents. But then at a certain point, we've got to kind of switch over, especially if we're on a different planet, literally, to something where we're much more kind of communitarian based, and we have to be able to work together and put aside differences and put aside politics, whatever else, any other earthbound kind of ways of working. And I suppose as generations go up and we start to have kids on Mars and we start to have schools on Mars, all of these things where we begin to really found a society there, which I'm sure will happen, then, you're going to have these norms that, it's going to start to fork. I can kind of see different types of humans in a way, sort of with different ideas on what those normative things end up being, which is exciting in many ways. but also I think challenges our own norms as well. It's like, they're doing things a bit differently down there, you know? So yeah, it's interesting to see how we'll react and how we'll accept that.
Yeah, I think it just provides for a much more rich notion of what it is to be human. If we have these multiple perspectives on what it is to be human from different planets. But just what you were saying there let me just talk a bit about how the Africa to Moon project works. So the Foundation for Space Development Africa is a non-profit. We've got to this point today without any money whatsoever, and we are purely collaborative. And the fact that we've found a launch partner to get to the moon who's offered this as a form of collaboration, I think this is an interesting perspective on space. So yes, competition has got us to where we are today, but does it need to be such a primary aspect of our human engagement going forward? So China offers the payload opportunities for different countries to apply for. So as the Foundation for Space Development Africa, we have no funding. So all of our partners provide different aspects of what we require to design, manufacture, test, and then ship our telescope to China. So whether it's commercial companies offering to machine different aspects of what we need for us, whether it's the 33 engineers that volunteer their time. In South Africa, we've got some of the world's leading radio astronomy engineers because of the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope. So these guys are working like after hours and putting huge amounts of effort and energy into just volunteering their time to get our design to where it is. As I said, commercial institutions have come on board. We've got South African government organizations like the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, the South African National Space Agency, offering us their facilities and also the time of their employees. So through sheer collaboration, we have got to where we are. And at some point, we might just need to pay for something. But so far, we have not. Every time we need something, we reach out. And whether it's the shielding materials, which we're now talking to various people for, people are excited to see an African first, whether they're from Africa or not.
Yes, absolutely.
They're excited to see Africa participating, and they're excited to be involved and to perhaps test their technologies on the surface of the moon, where they wouldn't normally have an opportunity to do so. So that's the kind of engagement that we do. The trade exchange, let's say. We could take your stuff as far as the moon to test how it works there, if you can build it for us. Thanks. So that's how we're working at the moment, and it's got us this far. So big shout out to all of the volunteers, not only in our project but all around the world. People who are driven by passion and who volunteer their time and energy because they're excited about a project and not because they're interested in about how they're personally going to gain from it.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm sure it's also taken a hell of a lot of hustle on your part as well to get some of that. So don't be shy on the credit on that too. Yeah. Rana, do you want to go in the meantime?
Dr. Adriana, amazing. Thank you. I grew up on the East Coast of Central Florida. I interned at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So NASA was right in my backyard. And so it's really wonderful to get to have a person not only so passionate, but to get to hear the depth of involvement and participation by a woman. So thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the perspective of how we as humans will have to show up to be successful in these other environments. And as you're talking about how we will have to integrate with our environments, how we will have to show up with a level of respect, I think of the indigenous communities that have lived in concert with our environment for thousands of years, and then us in whatever form as explorers would show up in the environment that they have lived in balance and kind of dominate it with our humanness. And I struggle, I'm like, because I don't, while yes, I would love to see us show up as better humans, I like why we need to show up as better humans here now. I mean, and I am from the US. So we're like that urgency is being made so apparent in how our government has been empowered, unfortunately, to engage with the world. So how do we justify not figuring it out here first?
Great question. Well put, beautifully put. Yeah, you spoke about indigenous people, and in my book, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it is to be human. And then we can't ignore that the first, I'd say 100,000 years of our existence, or even more, this little bubble we're living in now is a fraction of our time as humans on this planet. And the reason we made it this far is because we learned to live in harmony with the environment. And that's all of our ancestors who had evolved to live in harmony with their environment. We had the indigenous Australians living in harsh conditions in the desert there for as much as 60,000 years, I think it is, continuously with similar practices, a record of all sorts of massive geological events in their oral history, and just a fascinating look into what it is to be human. And so I think in this time now of technology, which enables us to explore beyond Earth in a way that even the most extreme creatures like fungi or any other creatures haven't necessarily developed the capability to explore beyond Earth. But we have, and the development of technology has put us, or because of our technology now, we're in this position we're in now, where our dominion over the environment has maybe characterized the last few hundred years in a way that it had never before in order to develop this technology. And I think maybe my answer to what she's saying now is we need to do both. We have the capability, we have the data, we have the knowledge, we have the technology, we have hopefully the self-awareness because of this 200,000-year history that we've been on this planet. I think we've got to do it all. We've got a big responsibility now. We can explore, we can keep exploring, because I think to not explore would be to be denying who we are as humans. So I'm reluctant to agree with the thing that we should stop doing one thing in order to do another thing. That feels limiting to me. I think we need to do it all. We need to keep exploring, but we need to do it in a way that's faithful to who we want to be as humans. And I think that decision by each one of us as individuals is so critical towards determining human culture, is deciding, how I want to be as a human. And I think I want to be curious. I want to be exploratory. I want to be empathetic. I want to be compassionate, and I want to be scientific, and I want to explore beyond Earth. I want to do all of those things. And to every child who feels the same way, because I think when we look back to how we are as children and how children are, I think you see these innately human characteristics like curiosity and openness and desire to explore. I think we see that. So, I think the difference between the moon and Mars and Earth is that on Earth, our planet is teeming with life. And so the possibility that our actions here destroy massive amounts of other species and ecosystems are far more dangerous, actually, than probably our actions on the surface of the moon or Mars will be. We don't need to go into maybe highly intelligent, energetic aliens that are living on Mars that we can't detect. Okay, that's another story for another day. But, Mars doesn't seem to be inhabited by life. While on Earth, we are destroying at a rapid rate the whole ecosystem of species that support us here. And so maybe we, deserve to eke out an existence on a barren planet like Mars to realize just how much we need to appreciate the living library that is Earth, with all of its history, 4 billion year history of living systems that have all culminated in today, basically. I don't know if I'm reaching a point or not, but I think we have to do it all. I think the Africa to Moon project really hopes to inspire young children that whether they're interested in space or not, whatever their interests are, that they don't need the billions of dollars of funding to do it, that the dream is enough, the passion, of course, the expertise, of course, the hard work, of course, the time, the collaboration, the networks, all of that's necessary. But to put the dream first, and then worry about how you're going to achieve it later. Just keep believing, keep going. And I think that's how we change culture at the same time. that's how we change the definition of what it is to be human, when we put our imagination and our dreams, give them higher priority perhaps than they've been given in the past few hundred years.
So beautifully said. Yeah, and I think you're a living example of that. So, yeah, got a question from Max here. He's given us two questions, bigger one and then a smaller one. So, what would you say is the most valuable lesson or takeaway that you could share from some of the training simulations or training environments that you've had, whether it's within some of your pre-astronaut training or some of the stuff you've been doing with Proudly Human? If there's been anything there that has been applicable, that could be applicable in a business environment, specifically around teams and collaboration. So that's an interesting one. And then also, what's your favorite space film? You knew that was coming.
Let me answer the second one first. Our conversation now has just reminded me a few times of The Expanse. So I don't know if you've watched that, Max or Alex. Yeah, The Expanse is a brilliant representation, I think, of what the future in the solar system could look like, from the biological adaptations, like the belters being, taller and really sensitive to higher gravity systems growing up on asteroids. And then the very kind of serious economic impact of exploring the solar system on resources. And when we look at space, it's mostly empty. So although there are a lot of atoms in the universe, they tend to be located in places that require resources to get to. And so even if we have the whole solar system at our disposal, it's still going to cost resources to extract these resources. So I think we do need to get to the asteroid belt. There's a wealth of resources there. We don't need to dig up the surface of Mars like we have Earth. There are rocks out there that could be perfectly catered for our needs. You just need to find the right one. So that's one thought, that Mars is even closer to the asteroid belt than Earth. So we've been talking about asteroid resource extraction for decades, if not longer, here on Earth. But perhaps the first Martians will be the first ones to do that as spacefaring natives. And then, The Expanse just gives a brilliant insight into how this might look. Actually, I need to watch it again for the third time. I think it's time. I've listened to the books as well. So the first question. So actually, we are looking for the perfect broadcast partner, because a number of broadcasters that came on board weren't a perfect fit for what we want to do, because we want to live through the Antarctic winter, which is a fairly serious endeavor. And some conversations with either directors or film companies were talking about injecting drama into the situation. And this leads me back to your question, which is what I overwhelmingly noticed when I did all the location scouts for these locations, the various extreme environments around the planet. So Namibia was a great one. In fact, there's a dune called the Namib Dune on Mars, because the terrain in Namibia, because it's very dry and a very ancient desert, 55 million years old. There are a lot of remarkable parallels between the dune formation and movements in Namibia with Mars. So that was one place I spent some time looking around for a perfectly remote location. Often I was surprised that people were living there. So I said, wait, in our convoy of vehicles, like desert faring vehicles, and we finally get to a place, I'm like, this is really remote. And then the chief Len Koiki, he's the chief of the community that's been given government concession to live there, said no, his mom just lives just over the hill. And so we drove and visited her, and there she is, living in the place where I'm like, this has got to be it. This is extremely harsh. So that's one aspect, that there are typically people living there, and these people are without drama. Let me go back to that as a theme. I visited Antarctica and saw how the operations teams work there. I went with a private company that does logistics for the various bases. They've got a landing strip where large craft can land, which is critical in Antarctica. You've got these local planes that can land on ice or whatever terrain. But then if you want to land like a Gulfstream 500, you need a properly operational airport, let's say. So seeing how the logistics around. Yeah, they didn't have that much. They had a few tents, but the vehicles that grade the landing strip are critical. Huge vehicles, obviously shipped in. So you can fly to Antarctica, and supplies are flown in, especially in emergencies during the summer, I might add, because in winter it's pretty much locked down completely for 9 months. Access to Antarctica is pretty much a no-go. And so in that way, Antarctica is a great analog for for Mars in a way that even the space station is not. So you can theoretically evacuate from the space station in 24 hours. Obviously, you can ask the astronauts who spent rather longer than expected there lately whether that's a reality or not.
Yes.
But physically, you can evacuate in like a day. The moon is like a couple of days away, but Antarctica, you're pretty much stuck there for the duration of the winter, 9 months, with the team that you're there with and the supplies that you're there with. So the South African base, for example, has three diesel generators, and these are not fancy new compact. No, these are the big old ones that where all the moving parts are visible, and then you need not one but two at least diesel mechanics. If one of them is sick or injured, then everyone feels the impact of the -60 temperatures outside.
Wow.
I think the South African base is more like -40 Celsius, but there are regions in Antarctica that drop to the coldest on Earth. -90 is the coldest ever measured Celsius. So drama, let's go back to that. I think the lesson is that people who operate in extreme conditions, I think, have learned to perhaps have a very well developed filter between their brain and their mouth, because you want to avoid any kinds of drama or tension that can emerge. And so I think how you behave and what you say in these areas, you might see that the personalities of people who spend a lot of time there, fun-loving people typically, but I think very calm people, very measured people, very reasonable people, or at least this is their behavior while they're in these environments, because you don't need to create scenarios with tension or drama, because these will emerge naturally and you need to be ready for these. So you need to make the rest of your day as calm and as reasonable as possible, so that when some ultimately, which will happen eventually, some kind of hitch or problem or issue emerges, that you're in the right state of mind to be able to deal with it. So I look forward to really living through the winter in Antarctica, which we haven't done yet. But that's what I've learned just from being in these environments. Yeah, I think maybe too much.
Wow.
And we wanted to make a TV show out of all of this. And so I think maybe because we watch a lot of TV shows that inject drama and tension and chaos into human relations, we start to think that this is how people behave normally. And this is really not, especially not in extreme environments.
I suppose the environment itself is enough of a source of drama and tension anyway.
Exactly.
There's no need to
That's what I was trying to
supplement. Yeah, even more. Yeah. I remember reading the story about Neil Armstrong when they were busy guiding the lunar module down to the surface for the first time in 1969, Apollo 11, and Neil being the guy for the job, because not only was he one of the best test pilots at the time, but even though I think you would know this better than I would, they were about to run out of fuel, I believe, because they couldn't quite, find the ideal place to land. And at all times, he was just cool as a cucumber, even though, they might have been seconds away from a real emergency situation, never mind the rest of the mission. But there was a sort of a unbreakable coolness, like, it's okay, I've got this. And even if it does get to the edge, we're still not going to let it, completely overboil. So it seems that is not only an essential ingredient for an astronaut who is able to manage the drama, manage the tension, manage the environment, but probably for a good general human quality too, I'd imagine.
And I think it's partly physical as well. So astronaut training, I think, would involve really manually keeping your heart rate down, whether you do that through breathing or some kind of meditation. But your vital signs will be monitored by teams. And so how you demonstrate that you're calm is literally through your physiology. Yeah. And so I think that's a take home, which I try to apply in like meetings, for example. When you feel your heart rate going up, this is not something to react to. This is something to go inward with and physically calm your heart rate down, do your breathing, do whatever you need to do before replying. And I think on a physical level, astronauts train like this for years. But I think that's something we can apply to all life, skip the drama.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine the flight surgeon like, calm down, Neil, calm down. You got this. Yeah. Maybe just a final question. If you were the head of, let's say, the astronauts corps, and you were, recruiting the next bunch of candidates to go to the moon, to go to Mars, what would be kind of on your list in terms of the traits, the kinds of personalities, the characteristics that you would be looking for, not just for an astronaut who's talented and brilliant and has the academic background, but also for someone who can manage some of the stuff that we've talked about today, which has been the social dynamics, being able to make responsible decisions, especially when you're far away from Earth and there's no reference points or immediate evacuation. What would some of those things on your list be?
Oh, this would be my favorite job in the world. So I think astronauts that go to the space station require a different set of characteristics, probably from the kinds of people you'd want to send to Mars. Maybe the moon is in similar category to the International Space Station or the Chinese space station. Whereas Mars, you need to have a dash of, I don't want to say crazy, but you need something additional to the protocol-oriented, detail-driven kind of personality that's going to function well in an environment that's close to Earth, where tens of thousands of people are watching and preparing for the kind of experiments these people will be doing there, waiting for the data. These people need to stick to protocol and be very detail-oriented and predictable. When you're looking at being 200 million kilometers away from Earth, you need a not entirely different kind of personality, but you need different aspects to that personality. And that includes being able to break protocol, being able to see the bigger picture and not only the detail, and being able to make decisions that weren't in the training manual. Just in conjunction with that, I would say a sense of humor, absolutely essential. The people I've met who work in extreme conditions always seem to have a great sense of humor. So being able to deal with tough situations in that way, I think, helps. So the methodology I would apply, though, I think wouldn't be in a deterministic kind of logical way. I like having a list of characteristics that you then try to fit people into that box. I don't think that's a good way to do it. So what Proudly Human was hoping to do actually was to more like generate mounds and mounds of data from different combinations of people going into extreme places, and then try to extract some learnings from the data. Because I think we've got too many preconceptions and too many biases as humans, and what we think leadership is, what we think a team should be, what we think all of these things should be. I think since childhood, we're indoctrinated with various things like that. So I think a really great way to do it would be not completely random. You need medical experts, you need engineers, you need different skill sets to obviously create a team, yes, but then you need to just run the experiment multiple times, like as many times as possible, maybe in the same place, like Antarctic winter, next 10 years, every winter send a different team there, or maybe the North Pole, and you can have shorter duration missions because the winter in Antarctica is like a year. Short duration missions, and just repeat, and then try to extract from the data, what that magical team that did karaoke every Tuesday, was like that the key that made them the most successful team? was the team that invented some game that they always played? Was that the reason? I'm giving sort of silly examples now, but like if we see teams that really not only perform their duties reliably and successfully, but also have this amazing culture that emerges, can we try to identify what the triggers for, what the precursors were for that culture? What was that chemistry? And I don't think that'll always be predictable. So I think it would be great to do like a data analytics project on this.
Yeah, definitely. I love how it's almost like how a hiring manager, at least how they should be looking at it, not necessarily in terms of tick boxes, but designing this around how the person in front of them is presented and what that might be, and also how they operate in context of like minds and what that chemistry is like, because the ability, once again, to go back to collaboration, to work in a team, especially if there's an emergency situation when the chips are down, perhaps, on a long trip to Mars, a sense of loneliness or isolation, other things that might pop up. They've got to have the kind of the inner tools to be able to deal with that without it affecting the mission, without it affecting, everyone else around them. And yeah, I suppose, some dark humor, or the ability to turn a shitty situation into a joke is probably priceless as well.
And empathy, I think I didn't mention enough maybe. So being able to sense when a team member has shifted their state of mind from one that's optimal to one that's not optimal, absolutely critical. And then, skills with like resolving arguments between people, I think so. Some kind of diplomacy training would also be a great addition. But predicting other people's state, or sensing other people's shifts in state of mind, absolutely essential skill, which is probably overlooked in current astronaut selection criteria.
It's amazing. I think it's the kind of criteria that we could all factor into more, whether it's, in a business or, collaborating with creatives or any kind of social situation, a high degree of curiosity, able to solve a problem, a sense of kind of can do and, never say die. I think that's essential too, not something where you're fatalistic and you're just going to, it's hopeless. But also the ability to really be to entertain, should we say, non-linear thinking as well? Because sometimes if you're facing a problem, certainly in space, which your training has prepared you for, but perhaps not exactly this problem that's in front of you, you've got to be able to pull every single resource, every single thing that, every single intuition out, some of the stuff that's not in the training manual, and be able to kind of work with it at a high velocity. So there's a real kind of problem-solving element there that I'd imagine is super helpful.
And hopefully there'd be some form of self-selection, I think. So the kinds of people who volunteer for these things typically have that unknown extra craziness, let's call it, that might enable them to do just that, to do something to solve a problem that's never been solved before, which is what you would be dealing with, probably on a daily basis.
It sounds like courage. Yeah. Beautiful. Adriana, thank you so much for spending time with us today to talk about what lights you up, and certainly what's lit me and everyone else listening up as well. And it's really an inspiration to hear, that there's lots to be hopeful for, not just on our planet, but on other ones in humanity. And you make us all proud in the work that you're doing. So well done. And I hope you'll be able to come speak with us again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Keep up the great work. Some really fascinating topics we touched on. And thanks to those of you who joined and asked questions. It's been fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.